Good evening, folks, and welcome back to day number 21 of the Bible in 365. Today we're going to be talking about Exodus chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, and talking all the way through Exodus chapter 14, ending in verse 20. Now you know the drill. Let's get started. Good evening, folks. So today in Exodus 12, we have the first mention of Passover. In summary, Exodus 12 tells us that God is going to kill every firstborn Egyptian child. Now, this doesn't even exclude the livestock. In order to avoid judgment, the Israelites covered their doorposts with the blood of a sacrificed lamb. Now, there were specific instructions on how to choose and how to cook the lamb and even how to eat the lamb. But ultimately, it was this act of obedience that would preserve the lives of the Israelites. Now, the Israelites were also instructed to eat bread without yeast, otherwise known as unleavened bread. The chapter then tells us that Pharaoh orders the Israelites to leave. Now, we learn that 600,000 men, plus women and children, migrate out of Egypt. This would have been at least a couple of million people. And it tells us that the Israelites had spent 430 years in Egypt. Moving forward, in chapter 13, we learn that Moses is called to dedicate the firstborns of the Israelites and their livestock to the Lord. There are also further instructions regarding the eating of unleavened bread and a feast that is to take place. An emphasis here is also placed on this idea of remembrance and remembering that the Lord brought them out of Egypt. This is supposed to be handed down through the generations. The chapter then highlights the route that the Israelites take to get out of Egypt, and it tells us that God appears as a pillar of clouds by day and a pillar of fire by night to lead their way in their travels. Now, chapter 14 tells us that the Israelites come to Pi Hahiroth, which is located next to the sea, and at this point, Pharaoh sends his chariots and his men to pursue the Israelites. Now the Israelites see Pharaoh and his men, and they cry out to Moses, complaining, "Why did God free us only to have us die here in the wilderness?" And it's kind of funny that they're thinking that way because they way outnumber the Egyptians sent by Pharaoh. He only sent 600 of his best chariots and then some of his men. So, I mean, even if we estimate liberally and say that he sent 60,000 men, well, there are literally a couple million, probably 2.5, 3 million Israelites. So why are they fearful? On top of that, they have God on their side. And this is what Moses tells them: stand firm and believe that God is going to deliver you. And so at this point, hearing the cry of the Israelites, the Lord tells Moses, hey, what are you doing? Why are you guys crying out? Lead the Israelites through the sea. Hold out your staff. I'm going to part the waters so they could just walk across on dry land. And I could further show my glory and my power when it comes to the Israelites and to the Egyptians and the interactions between them. Surely everyone, including the Egyptians, will know that I am the Lord. It is here in verse 20 of chapter 14 that our reading ends for tonight. For those of you watching this video today, perhaps one of the greatest things that you can do is just take a moment and pause and remember the faithfulness of God in your own life. We see that the Lord emphasizes this idea of remembrance to Moses, and Moses emphasizes it to the Israelites. He calls them to dedicate their firstborns, to set up a feast and a festival to remember the Lord's provision and his deliverance from Egypt. So I think it's appropriate for us to take the time to pause and to remember the faithfulness of God in our own life, of how he has provided for us and got us through the good and the bad. One of the best ways that you could do this is to keep a prayer journal of all the ways that you have prayed to God for help, and then to go back every so often, and you will be amazed to see how those prayers have been answered. And I would encourage you, this is just one of many ways that you can remember the faithfulness of God in your own life. All right, folks, I look forward to our time again together tomorrow as we explore Exodus chapter 14, beginning in verse 21, and go all the way to Exodus chapter 17, ending in verse 16. As always, folks, God bless.